$7 million, I whispered as the last wire confirmation blinked green on my laptop. I turned, still shaking, only to see Mark standing by the counter, suitcase zipped. He didn't look relieved. He looked free. "I think we should take a break," he said. "You've done enough." I stared at him. The man I'd rescued from bankruptcy, the man I believed in, was leaving right after I'd cleared every cent of his debt. "You're kidding," I said, my voice breaking. "It's not personal, Elena," he replied, slipping his watch on. "I just need space. You were helpful, but things change." Helpful. That word stabbed deeper than any insult. He kissed my forehead like a stranger and walked toward the door. The suitcase wheels clicked over the marble. I felt something inside me crack. When the door closed, the silence screamed louder than he ever had. But as I looked down at the stack of documents he'd signed without reading, my heart stopped trembling. He had no idea what he'd just walked away from. "My name is Elena Wells, 36 years old, financial consultant, former dreamer. For 6 years, I believe marriage was partnership. Mark owned a construction company that started strong, but greed and pride pulled it under. I put my career on pause to help him rebuild. I worked days and nights, negotiating loans, pleading with investors, cutting my own clients to save him. He used to hold my hand and say, 'Once this is over, we'll finally live.' I thought we were a team. When the debts piled up, I mortgaged my parents' old house and sold my inheritance stock. I convinced the bank to freeze his penalties. I paid every last invoice. And the moment the final transfer went through, he packed his things. People always say heartbreak is loud. Mine was silent. Just the sound of my own breath. Realizing I'd traded everything for a man who treated love like a business transaction. But that night, through the blur of tears, I opened my folder of documents. And there, on the last page, was my own safety net, the contract he never bothered to read. The debt settlement transfer agreement. I had written it weeks before, hidden inside the pile of forms he signed in a rush. He thought it was just bank paperwork. In truth, it gave me full authority to restructure his assets for repayment. It didn't take anything from him yet, but it gave me access, doors I could quietly open later. Still, I wasn't ready to act. I was too numb. When people get betrayed, they either explode or freeze. I froze. I sat for days, replaying every lie. His sudden work trips, his locked phone, the credit card charges in Miami. Then I saw the photo, Mark on a boat with a blonde woman half my age. My throat burned. I almost called him. I almost screamed. Instead, I closed my laptop. If he wanted distance, he'd get silence. Because silence is the one thing men like him can't stand. And while he enjoyed his new life, I would learn everything about his company, his investors, and his hidden accounts. He thought he'd broken me. He had just awakened someone he didn't know existed. 3 weeks later, I saw them together at a restaurant downtown. She laughed too loud. He looked proud, careless. When he spotted me, he didn't flinch. He simply smiled and said, "Elena, you remember Sophie. We're seeing where things go." People turned. My cheeks burned. I forced a polite nod. He whispered, "Try not to make a scene. You're better than that." Then he pulled out his card, the one still linked to the company account I'd stabilized, and paid for her meal in front of me. The humiliation sat heavy in my stomach. But even through the shame, a calm thought surfaced. Every transaction leaves a trail. That night, I checked the joint files he'd forgotten to revoke. Every luxury payment, every business trip, every deposit. It all ran through accounts I now controlled on paper. He thought he'd humiliated me. He had just handed me the map to his empire. And quietly, I started drawing new lines through it. I didn't tell anyone what happened. At work, I smiled. At home, I rebuilt. I spent hours reviewing his company structure, tracing how he'd hidden assets under new shell names. His arrogance made it easy. He reused the same passwords, the same accountant. One call confirmed what I suspected. Mark was preparing to relaunch the company under a new brand, using the debt I'd cleared as leverage to attract new investors. He planned to announce it publicly, pretending he'd miraculously recovered. He didn't know that the original licenses, patents, and legal rights to his designs now sat under my control. I could have ended him right there, quietly. But that would be too kind. I wanted him to shine first, to think he'd finally won. Only then would I take it all back, piece by piece, in the same public light where he'd once shamed me. For now, I waited. I smiled when he sent me polite emails about wrapping up old paperwork, because the final page of that paperwork would soon make him scream. The weeks blurred into a quiet rhythm. I woke before dawn, worked out, then logged into the files that once belonged to us. Every click reminded me of what I'd lost and what I was about to regain. Mark sent me short messages about transition details. I answered with short, polite replies, the kind that made him believe I was still the dependable ex-wife cleaning up his mess. At night, I studied the new company's investor list. He had convinced several old partners that he'd turned things around, that I'd been too emotional to stay involved. Hearing that through whispers hurt more than I expected. Still, I stayed quiet. People remember who screams, not who wins. I began moving small assets into a holding account under the same restructuring clause he'd signed. Nothing illegal, just legal precision hidden in plain sight. He thought I was gone from his world. I was inside every corner of it. One afternoon his accountant, a nervous man named Peter, called. "Mrs. Wells, I just need to confirm this transfer authorization you sent." I smiled. "Yes, Peter. It's part of the debt consolidation plan Mr. Wells approved months ago." He hesitated. "All right, I'll file it today." When the call ended, I realized how easy trust came to men when a woman spoke gently. That evening, I checked the shared account again. 2 more properties now listed under my holding company. I poured a glass of wine and whispered, "Cheers, Mark." Part of me wanted to feel guilty. Instead, I felt steady. He had lied to me in our kitchen with that same calm voice. Now I was learning what calm could really do. Outside, the city lights blurred against the window. Inside, I wrote one line in my notebook, "He will destroy himself." I'll just hold the mirror. By summer, his new company, Wells Prime, was everywhere. Glossy billboards, press releases, staged interviews about second chances. He wore suits I'd picked, used phrases I'd written in old proposals. He even quoted me once, "Success is built on sacrifice," and smiled like it was his idea. Friends sent me the article with awkward emojis. I told them I was happy for him. Inside, I was counting down. Every contract he signed, every investor he impressed, every deal he closed, used permits, blueprints, and property rights that were still legally tied to my holding company. I could have pulled the rug any day, but timing was everything. I wanted him to owe me not just money, but his reputation. One evening, while scrolling through social media, I saw a post. Wells Prime to host Grand Partnership Gala this September. A public signing ceremony. Cameras, press, investors. My heart pounded. That was where he would learn the truth. Before the gala, I needed to be invisible. I closed my consulting firm quietly and rebranded under a new name, eHeart Financial. Same skills, new identity. Through mutual acquaintances, I reached out to a few of Mark's potential investors, offering discreet background analysis. They didn't know who I was. They just knew I was efficient. When I handed over neutral reports, they trusted me instantly. I made sure none of them questioned his company, until the day they would have to. Meanwhile, Mark emailed again, asking if I could attend the gala for closure. Closure. He really wanted to show the world how civil we were. I replied, "Of course. I'll be there." That night, I stood in front of the mirror and practiced my smile, the same one I wore the day he left. Calm, polite, untouchable. He thought he was inviting an old ghost to watch him rise. He was inviting his reckoning. September arrived warm and bright. The hotel ballroom glittered with silver lights and tall glasses. Mark stood on stage, every inch the successful CEO. His new girlfriend hovered nearby in a white dress that looked borrowed from my past life. He spotted me across the room and smiled, maybe proud, maybe smug. "Elena, you came." "I wouldn't miss it," I said. My voice didn't shake. Cameras flashed as he raised a glass. "To new beginnings," he announced. When the ceremony began, the investors gathered around the signing table. The contract folder lay open, pages crisp. I recognized my formatting. It was my template. I had prepared it for him weeks ago when he begged for help finalizing the deal. He hadn't even changed the font. I watched as he signed every page, laughing, confident. When he reached the last one, his pen stopped. His eyes narrowed, then widened. The room hushed. And somewhere deep inside me, the ache I'd carried for months began to fade. Mark's fingers trembled as he flipped the page. The laughter around the table dimmed. "What is this clause?" he asked quietly. I tilted my head, pretending not to understand. "What clause?" He ran his thumb under the final paragraph, the one printed in the smallest, neatest font. The same paragraph he'd ignored months ago when I asked him to sign. The investors leaned closer. One of them murmured, "Everything now transfers under E. Hart Financial Holdings." Mark's face turned pale. "That can't be right." That's me," I said softly. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then a camera clicked. A flash went off. The lawyer beside him cleared his throat. "Mr. Wells, it seems this clause reassigns all post-settlement assets, including Wells Prime, to Ms. Wells's holding company." I smiled gently. Technically, it was always part of the debt repayment structure. You just never read it. He stood there frozen, mouth open, eyes burning into mine. That was the first time I saw fear behind his arrogance. The crowd didn't explode, it fractured. Whisper after whisper rippled through the room. His girlfriend's hand slipped from his arm. Mark forced a smile, trying to salvage control. "Ladies and gentlemen, there's clearly a misunderstanding. Elena, can we talk privately?" "Of course," I said. We stepped into the side hallway. The door shut behind us. He spun toward me. "What the hell did you do?" "What you taught me," I said quietly. "I saved your company. Again. You tricked me. No, you signed a legal contract. I just stopped cleaning up after you." He clenched his fists. "You think you've won? Those investors will never back you." "They already have," I said. "I own the assets. You can keep the name." He stared at me, breathing hard. "You'll ruin me." I met his eyes. "You ruined yourself the moment you walked out that door." He didn't know it yet, but the news would spread before dessert was served. When we walked back inside, the atmosphere had shifted. His girlfriend was gone. His lawyer was on the phone, whispering. The investors surrounded me instead. "Is this true?" one asked. "You own the controlling shares?" "Yes," I said evenly. "And I intend to honor every agreement made in good faith." They exchanged glances, some curious, some impressed. Mark tried to interrupt. "Don't listen to her, she's bitter, she's professional," I cut in. "And very thorough. You might remember, gentlemen, I was the one who handled your first contracts years ago." Recognition spread across their faces. The tone changed. Suddenly, I wasn't the abandoned wife anymore. I was the competent mind they'd underestimated. When the cameras turned back toward me, I let Mark drift into the background. In that bright, crowded ballroom, he finally looked small. For the first time in years, I could breathe. The fallout began within hours. The next morning, business headlines read, "Wells Prime Ownership Dispute Rocks Industry Gala." Online, clips of his shocked expression circulated with captions like "Read before you sign." Mark called me 9 times that day. I didn't answer. By the weekend, his partners froze his accounts pending investigation. The woman he'd left me for deleted every trace of him online. He showed up at my apartment one evening, eyes sunken, suit wrinkled. "You've humiliated me," he said. "No, Mark," I replied softly. "You humiliated yourself. I just kept the receipts." He looked around the apartment like he didn't recognize the person standing there. "I loved you, you know." I almost laughed. "No, you loved what I could fix." He left without another word. I didn't watch him go. The next morning, I found the courage to open my curtains fully. The sun felt like forgiveness. The months that followed were quieter than I expected. Mark's company dissolved under court review. The assets transferred smoothly into my new firm. The investors who'd once ignored me now called for advice. Sometimes, late at night, I'd remember the version of me who cried over his betrayal. She felt like a stranger now, fragile, but necessary. I started therapy not to forget, but to understand why I'd given so much to someone who never looked back. Healing wasn't instant. It was steady, like breathing after holding it too long. One afternoon, I met an old colleague for coffee. He said, "You look different." "I am," I told him. I finally stopped mistaking silence for peace. When I got home, I checked the framed copy of that infamous contract on my desk. Not out of pride, but as a reminder. People say revenge is sweet. They're wrong. It's quiet. It's calm. And sometimes it's justice. Mark vanished from the public eye for a while, but scandals have a way of echoing. Every few weeks, another headline dragged his name back into the spotlight. Tax issues, false statements, unpaid contractors. I didn't need to lift a finger. The truth worked on its own. But there were nights I couldn't sleep, wondering if I'd gone too far. Then I'd remember the day he'd walked out, suitcase in hand, saying, "You'll never understand what real ambition looks like." He was right. I didn't. I understood loyalty, and he never did. By spring, I'd rebuilt my consulting firm with a new team. Young, determined women who reminded me of myself before Mark. I paid them fairly. I taught them everything he dismissed as emotional fluff. One afternoon, one of them said, "You're like a second chance, Elena." I smiled. Maybe we all are. And in that moment, I realized revenge had quietly transformed into purpose. It was almost poetic when Mark reached out again, through an email. Subject line, "Can we talk?" I stared at it for a long time before opening it. He wrote about how everything had collapsed, how his accounts were frozen, how no one would work with him. He said he missed me. I read it twice. The words felt empty, like someone else had written them. He ended with, "I just want to understand how you could do this to me." I typed for a while, deleted, started again. Then I wrote one sentence. "You taught me how to survive you." And I pressed send. For the first time since he left, I felt no anger. Just peace, a strange, quiet peace that didn't need an audience. The story might have ended there, but fate had one last curtain call waiting for him. 3 months later, a charity gala sent me an invitation, one I hadn't expected. Wells Prime's assets had been merged under my company's new branch. The organizers wanted me as a keynote speaker for a segment on ethical leadership and resilience. When I arrived, cameras flashed like before, but this time they called my name. Halfway through the evening, I spotted him across the room. Mark. He looked thinner, older, humbled. Our eyes met for a second, and he froze. After my speech, reporters swarmed around me, asking how I managed to recover from betrayal. I answered simply, by learning that love without respect is just debt, emotional and otherwise. The applause that followed wasn't loud. It was warm. Mark slipped out before the event ended, but not before one of the journalists recognized him and whispered, "Isn't that her ex?" Sometimes, silence does the most damage. The next morning, my phone buzzed nonstop. Every major outlet had picked up the story again. Elena Hart speaks at gala where ex-husband appears uninvited. The photos said it all, me glowing in gold, him standing at the back, pale and out of place. Public sympathy, once his, shifted entirely. He posted a statement online about being misunderstood, but people weren't buying it anymore. For years, he'd sold a story about being the visionary. Now he was the warning. A week later, I received a legal notice, his lawyers offering to settle outstanding matters quietly. I agreed on one condition. He must issue a public apology, admitting how he'd wronged me. It took him 5 days to respond. When the apology finally went live, the comments were brutal. But I didn't read them all. I just watched the video once, listening to him say my name. Not with pride or power, but with regret. For the first time, his voice didn't shake me. It shook him. When the settlement funds cleared, I made a choice no one expected. I donated half to a women's foundation that helped victims of financial abuse start over. People asked if it was part of my revenge. It wasn't. It was closure. The rest, I invested into expanding my firm's mentorship program. The same week, I took down every old photo of us. The apartment felt lighter immediately. One evening, I sat on my balcony, watching the city lights shimmer like quiet stars. It hit me then. Revenge had only been the beginning. What I really wanted was freedom. The contract he'd signed wasn't a trap. It was a mirror. It reflected who we both were, one consumed by greed, the other finally brave enough to let go. As the wind brushed past my face, I whispered to no one, "You can't lose what you never owned." And for the first time, I truly believed it. Months passed. The chaos faded, and quiet finally had a sound. Yet one part of me still waited for something. Not revenge, not even regret. Just a sign that it all meant something. That sign came unexpectedly when a young reporter asked to interview me for a documentary about corporate survival stories. I agreed, thinking it would be small. Halfway through filming, she said, "You turned your worst heartbreak into a blueprint. How did you keep believing?" I smiled and said, "Because I stopped waiting for someone else to fix what they broke." When the episode aired, it went viral. People reached out, women, men, even strangers from other countries. They said my story made them feel seen. And that was the moment I realized I'd done it. I hadn't just survived Mark. I'd outgrown him. But I didn't know he'd seen the documentary too, or that it would push him toward the most public mistake of his life. Mark tried to rebuild himself by launching a comeback tech startup. He held a flashy press event, live streamed everywhere. The irony? He used my old branding style, the same one he once called too emotional. I watched from my office as he promised investors a new era of transparency. My assistant laughed quietly. Then the comments started rolling in. People began linking the old scandal, the debt, the apology video. The chat section exploded with memes. Within an hour, his live stream turned from hype to humiliation. I didn't post anything. I didn't need to. The truth was louder than any statement. That night, I received a short message from him, "You win." I stared at it for a while, then deleted it. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about walking away knowing I never needed to play his game in the first place. Weeks later, an envelope arrived at my office. It was from Mark's lawyer. Inside was a document, a formal dissolution of every joint asset still lingering between us. At the bottom, there was a handwritten note from Mark. I finally read the last page. I froze. My heart pounded, even though I knew exactly what he meant. That page, the one I'd slipped in months ago, stated that once he breached our agreement or abandoned the marriage, all rights to shared intellectual property and business assets reverted solely to me. When he'd stormed out that night, he'd unknowingly signed away everything he thought he'd gained. He hadn't screamed then, but he must have when he finally understood. That single line had rewritten his entire empire, legally and publicly. And for the first time, I didn't feel triumph. I felt release. The fallout was everywhere. News sites called it the cleanest corporate coup in recent history. Investors cut ties. His company filed for bankruptcy within weeks. I stayed silent through it all. No interviews, no celebrations, just stillness. Then one morning, while leaving a cafe, I saw him across the street. He looked smaller, lost. He didn't notice me, or maybe he pretended not to. For a moment, I wanted to cross the road, to tell him I forgave him. But then I remembered how forgiveness doesn't always mean reunion. It means choosing peace over pity. So I turned away. As I walked, the air felt lighter, and for the first time in years, I realized I wasn't carrying him anymore. I was free to build something that belonged only to me. A year later, my foundation launched its first scholarship. We named it The Last Page. It supported people who had been exploited or silenced, giving them the power to write their own endings. At the ceremony, I stood before a crowd of faces filled with hope. I shared one truth. Sometimes life erases everything you thought was yours, not to punish you, but to hand you a clean page. As applause filled the hall, I felt something inside me settle. The story that began with betrayal ended with purpose. Mark's scream had echoed across headlines once, but it was my quiet that lasted longer. I looked up at the banner above the stage, The Last Page, and smiled. Because that's exactly what this was. Not revenge, just the end of one story and the beautiful beginning of my own.